Have you ever tried no contact with an avoidant, expecting them to come running back, only to discover they seem perfectly fine without you? You cut off all communication, deleted their number, unfriended them on social media, and waited for the desperate texts or calls that never came. Meanwhile, they appeared to move on like nothing happened, posting happy photos and living their best life while you struggled with the silence you created. This is one of the most confusing and painful experiences you can have with an avoidant partner. Everything you read about no contact suggests it should make them miss you, realize what they lost, and fight to get you back. But with avoidance, no contact works completely differently than it does with other attachment styles. And understanding this difference is crucial if you want to use it effectively. Most advice about no contact assumes you're dealing with someone who fears abandonment, someone who will panic when you disappear and chase you to avoid losing you. But avoidants are wired differently. Their deepest fear isn't abandonment, it's engulfment. Your silence doesn't trigger their fear of loss. It triggers their relief at finally having the space they've been craving. You're about to discover why no contact with avoidance operates on completely different rules, why your strategic silence might actually be giving them exactly what they want, and how to approach no contact with avoidance in a way that serves your healing rather than reinforcing their avoidance patterns. Because the painful truth is that if you're using no contact to manipulate an avoidant into missing you, you're probably playing a game you can't win. The painful truth you need to face is that no contact doesn't make avoidants miss you. It actually provides them with relief. While you're suffering through the silence, wondering if they're thinking about you, they're often experiencing their first peaceful moments in weeks or maybe even months. Your absence isn't a punishment to them. It's a reward. Think about what no contact eliminates from an avoidance life. Emotional conversations they don't know how to navigate, pressure for intimacy they can't provide, expectations for consistency they struggle to meet, and the constant worry about disappointing someone they care about but don't know how to love properly. When you go silent, all of that pressure disappears instantly. Your no contact gives them permission to return to their default state, emotional independence. They don't have to worry about responding to your texts, managing your emotions, or dealing with relationship conversations that make them uncomfortable. They can focus entirely on themselves without feeling guilty about neglecting someone else's needs. The relief goes deeper than just avoiding relationship pressure. Many avoidants have been secretly wanting space but didn't know how to ask for it without hurting you. Your no contact solves this problem for them. They get the distance they've been craving without having to be the one who creates it. In their mind, you made the choice, which absolves them of responsibility for the separation. What makes this even more devastating is how avoidants interpret your silence. Instead of seeing it as evidence of your pain or a desperate attempt to get their attention, they often view your no contact as proof that they were right all along about relationships being unreliable and temporary. Your silence confirms their deepest beliefs about love being conditional and people eventually leaving when things get difficult. In their mind, your no contact isn't evidence of how much they meant to you. It's evidence that you were never really committed in the first place. They tell themselves that if you truly cared, you would have fought harder, communicated better, or found a way to work things out instead of just disappearing. Your silence becomes proof that their guarded approach to relationships was justified. This interpretation allows them to rewrite the entire relationship in their head. They start remembering all the moments when they felt pressured or overwhelmed, conveniently forgetting the good times and the genuine connection you shared. Your no contact gives them permission to focus only on the negative aspects of the relationship while dismissing everything positive as temporary or superficial. As days turn into weeks of silence, avoidants begin to feel increasingly confident in their decision to let you go. Each day without contact strengthens their belief that they're better off alone, that relationships are more trouble than they're worth, and that they were smart to keep their walls up. Your absence becomes a daily confirmation of their core worldview about the dangers of emotional attachment. The longer your no contact continues, the more entrenched they become in their avoidant patterns. They start to remember what life was like before you came along. Simpler, more predictable, less emotionally demanding. They rediscover the peace that comes with not having to consider someone else's feelings or needs. And that peace starts to feel more valuable than the connection they lost. What's particularly cruel about this process is that avoidants don't just move on from you. They often move on feeling validated in their approach to relationships. They didn't get their heart broken and learn to be more open next time. They got confirmation that keeping people at arm's length was the right strategy all along, making them even more avoidant in future relationships. Your no contact also triggers something devastating in avoidance. Emotional numbing. When faced with the potential pain of missing someone, their nervous system often shuts down emotional processing entirely. They don't sit with the sadness of losing you. They disconnect from the sadness altogether. This numbing makes it appear as if they don't care, when in reality they've simply turned off their ability to feel the loss. This emotional shutdown serves a protective function, but it also prevents them from processing what the relationship actually meant to them. Instead of working through their feelings about losing you, they simply stop feeling anything at all. This makes your no contact ineffective because they're not experiencing the emotional consequences of the separation that would theoretically make them want to reconnect. Meanwhile, you're probably checking their social media, analyzing their posts for signs that they miss you, looking for evidence that your no contact is affecting them. But what you're seeing is often a carefully curated performance of contentment. Avoidants have mastered the art of appearing unaffected, especially on social platforms where they can control their image completely. They might post photos of themselves looking happy and carefree, not because they're actually thriving without you, but because projecting independence and self-sufficiency is their default response to relationship endings. These posts aren't necessarily reflective of their internal state. They're protective performances designed to maintain their image of not needing anyone. The performance extends beyond social media into their daily lives. Avoidants often throw themselves into work, hobbies, or other relationships to fill the space you left behind. But this busyness isn't necessarily healing or growth. It's often just distraction from processing the actual loss. They stay busy to avoid feeling, not because they've genuinely moved on. As your no contact stretches on, something even more heartbreaking happens. Avoidants begin to forget why they cared about you in the first place. The emotional connection that once existed starts to fade from their memory, replaced by relief at not having to maintain that connection anymore. What felt significant and meaningful during the relationship becomes distant and unclear in your absence. This forgetting isn't intentional or malicious. It's a protective mechanism. Avoidants have learned to minimize the importance of relationships that end, because dwelling on lost connections feels dangerous and painful. It's easier to convince themselves that the relationship wasn't that important than to sit with the sadness of losing something meaningful. Your no contact inadvertently supports this minimization process. Without your presence to remind them of the positive aspects of your connection, they have no reason to fight against their tendency to downgrade the relationship's significance. Each day of silence makes it easier for them to convince themselves that what you had wasn't really that special after all. But perhaps the most devastating realization comes when you understand how your no contact affects their future relationships. Instead of learning from the loss of your connection, they're learning that people leave when things get complicated. Instead of developing better relationship skills, they're reinforcing their belief that emotional distance is the safest approach to love. Your silence teaches them that their worst fears about relationships were correct. People are temporary. Emotional investment leads to disappointment, and the safest way to protect themselves is to never fully let anyone in. This lesson doesn't make them want you back. it makes them more determined to avoid getting that close to anyone ever again. The irony becomes unbearable when you realize that your no contact strategy is potentially creating the very outcome you were trying to avoid. You wanted them to realize how much you meant to them, but instead you might be helping them convince themselves that meaningful connections are impossible or too risky to pursue. Each day of continued silence adds another layer of protection around their heart. Each day without hearing from you becomes another piece of evidence that they were right to be cautious about love. Your absence doesn't create longing, it creates certainty that their avoidant approach to relationships is not only justified but necessary for their emotional survival. The tension builds as you realize that every day of your no contact is potentially making things worse rather than better. You started this silence to make them realize your value, but instead you might be helping them convince themselves that you weren't valuable at all. The strategy that was supposed to bring them back is actually pushing them further away from ever wanting to reconnect. This growing awareness creates a horrible dilemma. Breaking no contact might seem desperate and validate their belief that you're too needy, but continuing no contact might allow them to forget about you entirely. You're trapped between two approaches that both seem guaranteed to fail, realizing that the rules of no contact that work with other people simply don't apply to avoidance. The most devastating part of this realization is understanding that your no contact might be giving an avoidant exactly what they always wanted, proof that they were right to avoid deep emotional connections in the first place. The brutal truth you've been avoiding is staring you in the face. Your no contact isn't a strategy to win back an avoidant. It's their greatest gift. You thought you were punishing them with your absence, making them realize what they lost, forcing them to confront their feelings. Instead, you've been doing exactly what every avoidant secretly hopes someone will do, disappear quietly without making them feel guilty about it. While you've been suffering in silence, counting the days and waiting for them to crack, they've been living their best avoidant life. Your no contact didn't break their heart. It gave them permission to finally stop pretending they wanted a relationship in the first place. You solved their biggest problem, how to end things without being the bad guy. This is the moment when you have to face the devastating reality that everything you believed about no contact with avoidance is wrong. They don't chase, they don't pine, they don't realize what they lost. They celebrate what they escaped. Your silence has become their validation. Every day you don't contact them is another day they can tell themselves they were right about relationships being too much work, too emotionally demanding, too risky for their carefully protected hearts. You're not making them miss you, you're helping them build an even stronger case against ever getting close to anyone again. The most crushing realization is that your no contact strategy has turned you into proof of everything avoidance. Believe about people that love is conditional, that people leave when things get difficult, that emotional connections are temporary and unreliable. You became the evidence they'll use to justify their walls for years to come. But here's what breaks your heart completely. They're not evil or manipulative for feeling relieved by your absence. They're terrified. Your no contact doesn't feel like abandonment to them. It feels like rescue. Rescue from having to pretend they can be the partner you needed. Rescue from the fear of eventually disappointing you. Rescue from the overwhelming responsibility of someone else's emotional needs. You wanted to be missed, but missing someone requires the ability to sit with discomfort, to process loss, to value connection over self-protection. Avoidants have spent their entire lives learning to do the opposite. Your absence doesn't create longing. It creates relief from having to fight against every instinct that tells them relationships are dangerous. This is your rock bottom moment. Understanding that the person you love most feels safest when you're gone. Your love didn't heal their wounds. It activated their deepest fears. Your commitment didn't make them feel secure. It made them feel trapped. Your desire for closeness didn't bring out their vulnerability. It reinforced their need for distance. The devastating truth is that no contact with avoidance doesn't work the way it's supposed to, because avoidants fundamentally experience relationships differently than other people. What feels like connection to you feels like suffocation to them. What feels like love to you feels like pressure to them. What feels like loss to you feels like freedom to them. Now that you've hit rock bottom and faced this brutal reality, you can finally start to understand how no contact actually works with avoidance and why it takes so much longer than you expected. The conventional no contact timeline that suggests 30 days or even 90 days is nowhere near enough time for an avoidant to process the loss of a relationship. Their emotional processing happens on a completely different timeline than other attachment styles. While anxiously attached people might feel the impact of no contact within days or weeks, avoidants can go months or even years before they begin to truly feel the absence of someone they cared about. This delayed emotional response happens because avoidants have learned to suppress their attachment needs so effectively that they often don't realize what they've lost until much later. The key difference is that avoidants don't miss the person immediately. They miss the relationship only after they've had enough time alone to remember why they wanted connection in the first place. This process can't be rushed and it can't be manipulated. It happens on their own timeline according to their own internal emotional rhythm. For no contact to eventually affect an avoidant, it has to last long enough for their relief to wear off and their genuine attachment needs to resurface. This typically happens when they've been alone long enough to work through their fear of intimacy and start craving connection again. But this process takes months, not weeks, and it requires them to feel genuinely safe in their solitude first. During extended no contact, avoidants often cycle through several phases. Initially, they feel relief and validation, as we've discussed, but after months of genuine no contact, some avoidants begin to question whether they were too quick to let go of the relationship. This questioning phase usually happens when they encounter something that reminds them of the positive aspects of your connection. The reminder might be seeing couples who seem genuinely happy, feeling lonely during significant life events, or simply having enough emotional space to remember the good times without feeling threatened by them. These moments of clarity can't be forced or manufactured. They have to arise naturally from their own internal processing. But here's what you need to understand. Even when avoidants eventually recognize that they lost something valuable, they still might not reach out. Their fear of vulnerability, their shame about how they handled the relationship, and their terror of being rejected often outweigh their desire to reconnect. They might realize they miss you without ever acting on that realization. This is why no contact with avoidance requires a fundamental shift in your motivation and expectations. If you're using no contact as a strategy to win them back, you're setting yourself up for disappointment and potentially wasting months or years of your life waiting for someone who might never return, even if they do eventually miss you. The only healthy way to approach no contact with an avoidant is to use it for your own healing and growth, not as a manipulation tactic to get them back. This means genuinely letting go of the outcome and focusing on rebuilding your life without them. It means processing your own attachment wounds and learning why you were drawn to someone emotionally unavailable in the first place. When no contact is truly about your own healing rather than changing their behavior, something interesting happens. You stop checking their social media. You stop analyzing their actions for signs that they miss you. And you stop organizing your life around the possibility of their return. You start building genuine contentment and self-sufficiency that doesn't depend on their validation or presence. This authentic self-focus is ironically what makes no contact most effective with avoidance. When you're no longer emotionally dependent on their return, when you've genuinely moved forward with your life, when you've stopped waiting for them to realize your worth, that's when they're most likely to notice your absence. But by that point, you might not want them back anymore. The cruel irony is that no contact works best with avoidance when you're no longer trying to make it work, when you've genuinely accepted that they might never come back, when you've found peace without them, when you've stopped hoping for reconciliation. That's when you've created the emotional space for them to potentially miss what they lost. But this process requires months or sometimes years of genuine separation, and it requires you to do the work of healing your own attachment wounds rather than focusing on changing theirs. Most people aren't willing to wait that long or do that much work on themselves, which is why no contact rarely works with avoidance the way people hope it will. The hard truth is that if an avoidant returns after extended no contact, they need to return as a fundamentally different person who has done their own work on their attachment issues. If they come back as the same avoidant person who left, the relationship will likely repeat the same patterns that led to the separation in the first place. This means that successful no contact with avoidance isn't really about getting them back. It's about becoming the kind of person who would only accept a partner who has done their own emotional work and can show up consistently in a relationship. It's about developing standards that would naturally exclude avoidant behavior regardless of who displays it. The truth about no contact with avoidance isn't the fairy tale ending you were hoping for, but it's something potentially more valuable. The opportunity to break free from the cycle of choosing emotionally unavailable people and build a life that doesn't depend on anyone else's emotional availability. Real healing from an avoidant relationship doesn't come from getting them back. It comes from understanding why you are willing to accept breadcrumbs of affection in the first place. It comes from recognizing your own patterns of attraction to people who can't meet your emotional needs and doing the work to change those patterns. When you approach no contact as a genuine commitment to your own growth, rather than a strategy to manipulate someone else's feelings, you create space for real transformation. You stop being the person who waits around for avoidance to decide you're worth their emotional availability, and you become someone who wouldn't tolerate that dynamic in the first place. This doesn't mean you have to hate your avoidant ex or judge them for their attachment style. It means accepting that they're doing the best they can with the emotional tools they have, while also accepting that their best might not be enough for the kind of relationship you want and deserve. The most empowering realization is that you don't need an avoidant to change or come back to validate your worth. Your value isn't determined by whether someone with intimacy issues can recognize it. Your desirability isn't measured by whether someone who fears closeness chooses to get close to you. Use your no contact period to build a life so fulfilling, so rich with genuine connections and personal growth, that an avoidance return becomes optional rather than essential. Create relationships with people who don't require you to minimize your needs or accept emotional unavailability as the price of love. If your avoidant ex eventually does the work to become securely attached and returns as someone capable of genuine intimacy, you'll be in a position to evaluate whether that new version of them fits into the life you've built. If they don't return or don't change, you'll have built something beautiful anyway. No contact with avoidance works differently because avoidants work differently. Accept this truth. Focus on your own healing and let their journey be their responsibility while you take full ownership of yours. Have you ever tried no contact with an avoidant only to discover they seemed fine without you? Have you found yourself waiting longer than expected for someone to realize what they lost? Share in the comments what your experience taught you about the difference between no contact as manipulation versus genuine self-care. If this helped you understand that the real power of no contact lies in your own transformation rather than changing someone else, like this video and subscribe for more insights into building relationships based on mutual emotional availability rather than one-sided hoping. Thanks for watching.